The morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Base Coronado as 78-year-old James Mitchell adjusted his worn baseball cap and straightened his old service jacket. Today was supposed to be simple. Just another proud grandfather watching his grandson graduate from Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL training. Nothing more, nothing special. He'd kept his head down for 50 years, living quietly in a small town in Montana, and he intended to keep it that way. His daughter Sarah pulled up in her rental car, her face beaming with pride mixed with nervous energy. "Dad, you ready? We can't be late for this." James smiled softly, the kind of smile that had weathered decades of silence and carefully guarded secrets. "I'm ready, sweetheart. Been looking forward to this day since Tommy told us he was joining." As they drove through the gates of the naval base, James felt something stir inside him. Something he'd buried deep for half a century. The smell of the ocean, the sight of young warriors preparing for their future, the familiar rhythm of military life. It all came rushing back. Sarah glanced at her father, noticing how his eyes had changed. "Dad, you okay?" "You'd look like you've seen a ghost." "Just memories," James replied quietly. "Been a long time since I've been on a base like this," Sarah nodded, knowing better than to push. Her father had served in Vietnam, or so the family had always been told. He rarely spoke about it, and when he did, it was always brief and vague. "Different war, different time," he'd say, then change the subject. The parking lot was filling up with families, all dressed in their best, all carrying the same mixture of pride and relief that their sons had made it through one of the most grueling training programs in the world. Only 23% of candidates made it through BUDS. Tommy Mitchell was one of them. As they walked toward the ceremony area, James noticed the instructors standing at attention, their bearing unmistakable. These were warriors, men who had seen combat and survived, men who commanded respect through actions rather than words. "There he is," Sarah exclaimed, pointing toward a formation of newly graduated SEAL candidates. Tommy Mitchell stood tall, his uniform crisp, his face showing the transformation from boy to warrior. At 23, he looked older now, hardened by months of the toughest physical and mental training imaginable. James felt his chest tighten with pride. His grandson had done it. The boy who used to play soldier in his backyard had become the real thing. They found their seats in the third row, surrounded by other families. The ceremony was about to begin. A Navy band played the national anthem as everyone stood, hands over hearts. James stood straighter than most, his posture betraying decades of military discipline that he usually kept hidden. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed across the field. "Please welcome Commander Robert Hayes, SEAL Team 7. The commander walked to the podium with the confident stride of a man who had led warriors into battle. He was in his mid-50s, lean and weathered, with eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. As he began his speech about honor, courage, and commitment, his gaze swept across the crowd. Then his eyes landed on James Mitchell. For a moment, Commander Hayes stopped mid-sentence. His face registered something that made several people turn to see what had caught his attention. His eyes were locked on the old man in the third row, specifically on James's forearm, where his sleeve had ridden up slightly, revealing the edge of a faded tattoo. James noticed the commander's stare and instinctively pulled his sleeve down, but it was too late. The damage was done. Commander Hayes recovered quickly, finishing his speech with professional composure, but those who knew him well noticed something had shifted. Several times during the rest of the ceremony, his eyes drifted back to the old man in the third row. The graduation proceeded with military precision. Each candidate was called forward to receive their SEAL Trident pin, the symbol that marked them as members of one of the most elite fighting forces in the world. When Tommy Mitchell's name was called, Sarah squeezed her father's hand. "He did it, Dad, just like you." James smiled, but his mind was elsewhere. He'd seen the commander's reaction. After all these years, someone had recognized the mark. The one thing he'd carried with him all this time, hidden under long sleeves and careful positioning. The tattoo that told a story he'd promised never to tell. After the ceremony concluded and families rushed forward to congratulate their graduates, Commander Hayes made his way through the crowd. His target was clear. He moved with purpose toward James Mitchell, who stood slightly apart from the celebration, watching his grandson accept congratulations. "Excuse me, sir," Commander Hayes said, his voice carrying a mixture of respect and barely contained curiosity. "I couldn't help but notice that mark on your arm. May I ask where you got it?" James turned slowly, meeting the commander's eyes. For a long moment, neither man spoke. It was a conversation happening in silence, warrior to warrior, across generations. "Old memory," James replied simply. "Different time. That's not just any old memory," Hayes said quietly, stepping closer so others wouldn't overhear. "I've only seen that mark once before, in a classified file I shouldn't have had access to. A file about operations that officially never happened." James's jaw tightened. "Then you know better than to talk about things that officially never happened." Sarah approached, her smile fading as she sensed the tension. "Dad, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart," James said, his voice steady. Commander was just introducing himself, but Commander Hayes wasn't ready to let this go. 50 years of wondering, of hearing whispers about ghost operations and phantom teams, and now here stood a man who might be one of them. "Sir, could I have a moment of your time? Privately?" "Dad, Tommy wants to introduce you to his instructors," Sarah interjected, not understanding the weight of the moment. "Give me 5 minutes," James said to his daughter, then turned to the commander. "Let's walk." They moved away from the celebration, toward the waterfront, where waves crashed against the beach, where Bud's candidates had endured Hell Week. The sound of the ocean provided cover for their conversation. "How old were you?" Hayes asked without preamble. 23, James replied. "Same age as my grandson is now. And the tattoo." James was silent for a long moment, watching the waves. "You really want to know?" "Because once I start talking, there's no going back. Some stories are meant to stay buried." "I need to know," Hayes said firmly. "I've led men into combat. I've made decisions that cost lives and saved others. But there are operations in our history that we barely understand. Ghost teams that did things no one else could do. If you were part of that, sir, your story needs to be told. Not publicly, maybe, but it needs to be remembered." James turned to face the younger commander. "You ever hear of something called Project Silent Thunder?" Hayes' expression changed instantly. "That's classified above my clearance level. I've only seen references to it in documents that were mostly redacted." "Good," James said. "That means the right people are still keeping the secret. What I'm about to tell you stays between us. Not because I'm ashamed of what we did, but because the men I served with deserved their peace. Most of them never made it home." The commander nodded solemnly. "You have my word." James took a deep breath, and for the first time in 50 years, he began to speak about the things he'd sworn never to reveal. It was 1969. I was a young Marine, fresh out of advanced training, when I was pulled aside by an officer I'd never seen before. No name, no rank insignia, just a folder with my personnel file and a question: "How far are you willing to go for your country?" "I thought I was being recruited for regular special operations," James continued, his voice steady despite the weight of memory. "Turns out it was something else entirely. Something that didn't have a name, didn't have a unit designation, didn't officially exist." Commander Hayes listened intently as James described a selection process that made modern SEAL training look tame. Psychological evaluations that pushed candidates to their breaking point. Physical trials designed to find men who could survive anywhere under any conditions. And most importantly, tests of loyalty and discretion. They wanted ghosts, James explained. Men who could disappear into enemy territory, conduct operations that would change the course of the war, and then vanish without a trace. No glory, no recognition, no official record of what we'd done. How many of you were there? Started with 60 candidates. By the end of selection, we were down to 12. We called ourselves the Phantoms. But that name never appeared in any document. We didn't exist. The tattoo, James explained, was something they'd all gotten together after their first operation. A simple design that meant nothing to anyone who didn't know its significance. To outsiders, it looked like a common military tattoo from the Vietnam era. But to those who knew, it identified members of one of the most classified units in American military history. We operated in places that the military officially wasn't in, James continued. Cambodia, Laos, North Vietnam, deep behind enemy lines. Our job was to do the things that couldn't be done through conventional means. Rescue operations that couldn't be acknowledged, intelligence gathering that couldn't be traced back, and yes, sometimes eliminations that needed to look like accidents or enemy action. Commander Hayes stood silent, absorbing the weight of what he was hearing. This explained so much. The gaps in Vietnam War records, the rumors of impossible rescues, the operations that achieved success through means that were never explained. The tattoo, James said, rolling up his sleeve to fully reveal the faded mark, represents the 12 of us. 12 stars arranged in a specific pattern. But if you look close, you'll see that 3 of the stars are slightly darker. Hayes leaned in, examining the tattoo carefully. Indeed, 3 of the 12 stars were shaded differently. Those are the 3 of us who survived, James said quietly. The other 9 died in operations that never happened, in places we were never supposed to be. Their families were told they died in combat or accidents. The truth stayed buried with them. Why reveal this now? Hayes asked, after 50 years of silence. James looked back toward the graduation ceremony where his grandson was celebrating with his fellow SEALs. Because that young man over there is about to enter a world where he'll be asked to do impossible things, where he'll see his brothers die for missions that might never be acknowledged. And I want someone in the chain of command to understand that this isn't new, that the burden he's taking on has been carried by others before him. Sir, Hayes said with genuine respect, what you're describing, these operations, do you have any proof? Any documentation? James smiled grimly. You're thinking like an intelligence officer. Good. Shows they train you well. But no, we don't have proof. That was the point. Everything we did was deniable. The only evidence that we even existed are these tattoos and the memories that some of us carry. Some of you. 2 of us are left now, James revealed. My teammate Marcus died 3 years ago. Heart attack, peaceful in his sleep. That leaves me and 1 other. We made a pact after the war. We'd never speak of what we did until we were both gone. But seeing that young man graduate today, knowing what he's stepping into, I realized some stories need to be told, even if they can't be officially acknowledged. Commander Hayes processed this information carefully. Everything about James's demeanor, his bearing, the way he moved and spoke, confirmed that he was telling the truth. This wasn't some old veteran embellishing war stories. This was a warrior who had carried the weight of classified operations for half a century. What kind of missions did your team conduct? Hayes asked. James looked out at the ocean, his eyes distant. First one was a rescue. 3 CIA officers had been captured in Laos. Regular military couldn't go in because officially we weren't operating in Laos. So they sent us, 12 men against a fortified camp holding 50 enemy soldiers. How did you get them out? We didn't go in loud, James explained. We spent 3 days observing the camp, learning their routines, identifying weaknesses. Then on the 4th night, during a thunderstorm, we went in silent. 6 of us created a diversion on the east side of the camp, while the other 6 extracted the prisoners from the west. The enemy never knew we were there until their prisoners were gone. And the operation that cost you 9 men? James's expression darkened. That happened in 1971. We were tasked with destroying a weapons cache deep in North Vietnam. Intelligence said it was a storage facility for Soviet-supplied equipment that was being used to kill American soldiers. We went in knowing it was dangerous, but the stakes were too high to refuse. He paused, the memory clearly painful even after so many years. Everything went wrong from the start, he continued. Our intelligence was outdated. The facility wasn't just a storage depot, it was an active command center. We were compromised before we even reached the target. The team split up to create multiple escape routes, but the enemy had reinforcements we didn't know about. Commander Hayes waited patiently as James gathered himself to continue. I watched men I'd trained with, fought alongside, died to give the rest of us a chance to escape. Martinez held off a platoon of enemy soldiers so we could cross a river. Johnson detonated our remaining explosives to cover our withdrawal, knowing he wouldn't survive the blast. One by one, they made the choice to sacrifice themselves so the mission could be completed and the survivors could make it home. And you were one of the 3 who made it out. Marcus, Williams and me, James confirmed. Williams died 2 years after we got home. Couldn't live with the survivor's guilt. Took his own life. Left a note saying he should have died with the others. After that, it was just Marcus and me carrying the story. The 2 men stood in silence for a moment, the weight of history hanging between them. Finally, Commander Hayes spoke. Sir, what you and your team did, it matters. Even if it can never be officially recognized, it matters. Those men died protecting their country and their brothers. That's the highest honor any warrior can achieve. James nodded slowly. I appreciate that, Commander. But I didn't tell you this story looking for validation. I told you because you're going to lead men like my grandson into situations where they'll have to make the same impossible choices my team made. I wanted you to understand that the legacy of service, of sacrifice, it goes deeper than any official record shows. I understand, sir. And I promise you I'll carry this knowledge with respect. Your team's story won't be forgotten, at least not by me. As they walked back toward the celebration, Sarah intercepted them, her expression concerned.
Dad, Tommy's been asking for you.
Is everything all right? Everything's fine, sweetheart, James assured her. The commander and I were just talking about old times. Tommy Mitchell approached, his face still flushed with the excitement of graduation. Grandpa! Commander Hayes! I was hoping you two would meet. Grandpa, the commander wants to tell you about where I'm being assigned. Hayes smiled at the young SEAL. Your grandson has a bright future ahead of him. Mr. Mitchell, he showed exceptional leadership during training. We're assigning him to one of our most elite teams. James felt a mixture of pride and concern. He knew what that meant. The most elite teams got the most dangerous missions. History was about to repeat itself. I'm proud of you, son, James said, pulling his grandson into a hug. But remember, being part of an elite team means more than just being the best. It means being willing to sacrifice for your brothers, to put the mission above yourself, and to carry burdens that others will never understand. Tommy looked at his grandfather with new eyes. There was something in the old man's voice, a depth of experience that went beyond the simple Vietnam veteran story the family had always known. Grandpa, you never really told us much about your service. What did you do in Vietnam? James glanced at Commander Hayes, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Some truths could be shared, even if the full story remained classified. I did what needed to be done, James replied simply. Same as you'll do. Same as every warrior who came before you. We serve not for glory or recognition, but because some people need to stand between the innocent and those who would do them harm. The sun was beginning to set over the Pacific, casting golden light across the naval base. Families were starting to disperse, graduates were saying goodbye to instructors, and the day's celebration was winding down. But for James Mitchell, something had changed. For the first time in 50 years, someone else knew the truth. The burden he'd carried alone for so long was now shared, even if only with one other person. As they walked back to the car, Sarah noticed something different about her father. He seemed lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. You okay, Dad? She asked again. I'm good, sweetheart, James replied honestly. Better than I've been in a long time. That night in his hotel room, James couldn't sleep. The memories he'd kept locked away for decades were now swirling through his mind. Faces of men he'd served with, operations that had tested every limit of human endurance. Moments of triumph and tragedy that had shaped who he'd become. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in months. It rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. James? That you? Hey, Marcus, James said quietly. I know it's late, but I needed to talk. Everything all right? Your grandson's graduation was today, wasn't it? Yeah, he made it through buds, but something happened at the ceremony. A commander recognized the tattoo. There was a long pause on the other end. What did you tell him? The truth, or as much of it as I could. Marcus, I know we made a pact to stay silent, but seeing Tommy graduate, knowing what he's stepping into, I couldn't keep it all buried anymore. Another pause, then a soft chuckle. You know what, James? I'm relieved. Been carrying this weight for 50 years. Maybe it's time the story started getting told, even if it's just to a few people who need to know. You're not angry. Angry? Brother, I'm proud of you. Those boys who died deserve to have their story told, even if it can't be official. And maybe knowing what we went through will help the next generation understand what they're really signing up for. They talked for another hour. Two old warriors sharing memories that had been locked away for too long. When James finally hung up, he felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: peace. The next morning, Commander Hayes called James's hotel room. Mr. Mitchell, I was wondering if you'd be willing to have breakfast with me. There's something I'd like to discuss. They met at a small diner off base, away from official eyes and ears. Hayes waited until they'd ordered before speaking. I spent all night thinking about what you told me yesterday, the commander began. And I have a request. It's completely unofficial, and you're free to say no. Go on, James encouraged. I want you to talk to my team, not about the classified operations, but about what it means to be part of something that demands everything from you. About sacrifice, about carrying burdens that no one else understands, about living with the choices we make in combat. James considered this carefully. Your team knows I'm Tommy's grandfather. Wouldn't it seem strange for me to be giving them some kind of talk? I'll tell them you're a Vietnam veteran who served in special operations. That's true enough. What you choose to share beyond that is up to you. When? Tomorrow, if you're willing. Before Tommy's team ships out for their first assignment, James nodded slowly. I'll do it. On one condition. This stays informal. No official record, no videos, nothing that puts what I say into any kind of permanent form. Agreed? Hayes confirmed. This is just one warrior sharing wisdom with the next generation. The next evening, James found himself standing before a group of 20 newly graduated SEALs, including his grandson. The room was simple, just a training facility classroom with folding chairs and fluorescent lights. Nothing fancy, nothing official. Commander Hayes made a brief introduction. Gentlemen, this is James Mitchell, Tommy's grandfather. He's a Vietnam veteran who served in roles that shaped our modern special operations doctrine. He's agreed to share some of his experiences with you. I expect you to listen with the respect his service deserves. James stood before them, these young warriors who reminded him so much of his old team. The same eager eyes, the same confidence mixed with the humility that grueling training brings. They had no idea what they were really in for. I'm not here to tell you war stories, James began. I'm not here to relive glory days or try to prove I was tougher than you. I'm here because Commander Hayes asked me to talk to you about something that doesn't get covered in training manuals. The cost of being a warrior. The room was silent. Every eye focused on the old man with the weathered face and the carefully hidden tattoo. You've all just completed one of the toughest training programs in the world, James continued. You've proven you can survive extreme physical hardship, that you can operate under pressure, that you're willing to push beyond normal human limits. But training, no matter how realistic, can't prepare you for everything you're about to face. He paused, gathering his thoughts. You're going to see your brothers die. Not all of you will make it home from every mission. And when that happens, you'll ask yourself if it was worth it. If the mission justified the cost. If you could have done something differently. The young SEALs shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the motivational speech they'd expected. I served with 11 other men in operations I can't talk about, James revealed carefully. 9 of them died. For 50 years, I've carried the weight of wondering if their sacrifice meant anything. If the missions we accomplished justified their deaths, Tommy watched his grandfather with new understanding, finally seeing beyond the quiet farmer he'd always known. "Here's what I learned," James said, his voice stronger now. Their sacrifice wasn't about the specific missions. It was about brotherhood. Every one of those men who died, they didn't die for abstract concepts like freedom or democracy. They died protecting their brothers. They died giving the rest of us a chance to complete the mission and make it home. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each young warrior. That's what you need to understand about this profession. You're not just joining a team. You're becoming part of a brotherhood that transcends time. The men who came before you, the ones who gave everything, they did it knowing that others would carry on the mission. You're the inheritors of their legacy. Before we continue with how this powerful meeting ends, take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Tomorrow we have something even more special waiting for you. Now back to James's story, but here's the other side of that coin, James continued. You'll also have to live with the choices you make. There will be operations where everything goes right, where you execute perfectly and complete the mission. And there will be operations where everything goes wrong, where you have to make impossible decisions with incomplete information. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing the tattoo that had started this entire conversation. This mark represents 12 men who promised to stand together no matter what. 9 of them are dead. For 50 years, I've wondered if I should have been one of them. Why did I survive when better men didn't? That's the survivor's guilt that every warrior carries. And there's no training that prepares you for it. The room remained silent, but the atmosphere had shifted. These young warriors were beginning to understand that their grandfather, this quiet old man, had lived a life of service far deeper than they'd imagined. "So here's my advice," James said. "When you're out there operating in the dark places of the world, remember that your brothers are the only thing that matters. The mission is important, yes, but your teammates are what you're really fighting for. Watch their backs, trust them to watch yours, and know that the bonds you form will last the rest of your life." He paused, emotion creeping into his voice. "And if some of you don't make it home, know that your brothers will carry you forward. They'll remember your sacrifice. They'll honor your memory by continuing the mission. That's what warriors do. We carry our fallen forward." Tommy stood up, his voice thick with emotion. "Grandpa, I never knew. All these years, you never said anything about what you really did." James smiled sadly at his grandson. "Some stories can't be told, son. Some service happens in the shadows, but that doesn't make it any less important. You're about to enter that same world. And when you do, you'll understand why some warriors choose silence." Commander Hayes stood as well. "Mr. Mitchell, on behalf of these warriors and all who came before them, thank you. For your service, for your sacrifice, and for sharing your wisdom with the next generation." The young SEALs stood as one, coming to attention in a show of respect for the old warrior who had finally revealed a glimpse of his true story. It wasn't official, wouldn't appear in any record, but in that moment, a connection had been forged across generations. As the meeting broke up and the young warriors filed out, several stopped to shake James's hand or thank him for his words. Tommy lingered until they were alone. "Grandpa, why didn't you ever tell us?" "Mum, me, the family. We should have known what you sacrificed." James put his hand on his grandson's shoulder. "Because that's not why we do it, son. We don't serve for recognition or glory. We serve because someone has to stand in the gap. The fact that most people never know what we do, that's not a burden. That's the point. We operate in the shadows so others can live in the light. But 9 men died. Your team, doesn't their story deserve to be told?" "Their story's being told," James replied. "Every time a young warrior like you steps up to serve, every time someone puts on the uniform, knowing the risks, that's their story continuing. They didn't die for recognition. They died for each other and for the mission. That's the only memorial they need." Tommy hugged his grandfather, understanding for the first time the depth of sacrifice that had been hidden behind the quiet farmer facade his whole life. As James left the base that evening, he felt different, lighter. 50 years of silence had been heavy. but sharing even a part of the truth had lifted something from his soul. The full story would remain classified, probably forever, but that was okay. The important part had been passed on to the next generation. Commander Hayes caught up with him in the parking lot. "Mr. Mitchell, one more thing. That other survivor you mentioned, the one besides you, any chance he'd be willing to share his story too?" James smiled. "Maybe, but that's his decision to make. I can tell you this, though. Marcus Washington lives in Atlanta. If you reach out, mention my name. He might be ready to talk. Thank you, sir, for everything." As James drove away from Naval Base Coronado, the sun setting behind him, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. From a young Marine to a member of a ghost team, from warrior to grandfather, from keeper of secrets to reluctant storyteller. It had been a long road, but finally he felt like he'd done right by his fallen brothers. Their story, even if it could never be fully told, would live on in the warriors who came after them. And that, James realized, was the greatest honor they could have. 3 weeks after the graduation ceremony, James Mitchell received an unexpected visitor at his Montana farm. A black SUV pulled up his driveway, and out stepped Marcus Washington, the last surviving member of their ghost team. The two men hadn't seen each other in person for over a year. "You couldn't just call?" James said with a smile, embracing his old brother in arms. "Some conversations need to happen face to face," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "Commander Hayes reached out to me, said you broke our silence." They sat on James's porch, watching the Montana sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Atlas, James's new German shepherd, lay between them, sensing the bond these two men shared. "I had to, Marcus," James explained. "Seeing Tommy graduate, knowing what he's walking into, I couldn't let another generation go in blind. They need to know that what they're about to do, it's been done before. That they're part of something bigger." Marcus nodded slowly, pulling out a worn photograph from his wallet. It showed 12 young men in unmarked uniforms, standing together before their first mission. 9 of those faces belonged to ghosts now. "I've been thinking about this a lot," Marcus said quietly. "About whether we did the right thing staying silent all these years. About whether their families deserved to know the truth." "Their families were told they died heroes," James replied. "That is the truth. The rest, the specifics, those details, don't change what they sacrificed. Maybe not. But Hayes got me thinking. What if there are others like us? Other ghost teams from different eras, carrying similar burdens? What if by staying silent, we're making it harder for them?" James considered this. It was a perspective he hadn't fully explored. The burden of classified service wasn't unique to them. Every generation had its secret warriors, its phantom operations, its unsung heroes. "What are you suggesting?" Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. "Hayes wants to create something unofficial. Not a support group exactly, but a network. Warriors who've operated in the shadows, who carry classified burdens, a way for them to connect without compromising operations or revealing specifics. How would that even work?" "Carefully," Marcus smiled. "Very carefully. No official records, no government connection, just warriors helping warriors. Hayes has connections across multiple special operations communities. He thinks we could provide guidance, understanding, maybe help prevent some of the problems we faced." James thought about Williams, their third survivor, who had taken his own life because he couldn't carry the burden alone. If they'd had someone to talk to, someone who understood, maybe he'd still be alive. "I'm listening." Over the next hour, Marcus outlined the concept. It wouldn't be therapy or formal counseling. It would be experienced warriors available to talk, to listen, to provide perspective to those dealing with the unique challenges of classified service. Nothing operational would be discussed, no secrets revealed, just shared understanding among those who'd walked similar paths. "What about operational security?" James asked, always the careful operator. "That's the beauty of it," Marcus explained. "We don't need to know what anyone did. We just need to understand what it feels like to carry secrets, to lose brothers, to wonder if the missions were worth it. The specifics don't matter. The burden does. James watched the sun disappear behind the mountains. His farm, his quiet life, it had been his escape from the shadows. But maybe running from the past wasn't the answer. Maybe facing it, helping others face theirs, that was the real way forward. You know what Hayes told me? Marcus continued. He said that conversation you had with his team, it changed something. Those young SEALs understood for the first time that the burden they're taking on is real, lasting, and shared by those who came before them. Several of them came to him privately afterward, asking questions about how to handle the psychological weight of the profession. That's good, James acknowledged. Better they think about it now than wait until it crushes them. Exactly. And that's what we could offer. Not answers, because there aren't always answers, but perspective. The knowledge that what they're feeling, what they're struggling with, others have felt it too. A truck appeared on the road, slowing as it approached the farm. James recognized it immediately. Tommy Mitchell climbed out, his face showing surprise at seeing Marcus there. Grandpa, Mr. Washington, I wasn't expecting both of you here. Your grandfather and I were just discussing old times, Marcus said warmly. And maybe future ones too. Tommy joined them on the porch, accepting a beer from his grandfather. Actually, I'm glad you're both here. I wanted to talk to you about something. The two old warriors exchanged glances. They knew that tone. Something was weighing on the young SEAL. My team got our first real assignment, Tommy began. I can't tell you where or what, but it's the kind of mission that could go very wrong. And I'm scared. Not of dying exactly, but of letting my team down. Of making a mistake that costs someone their life. James and Marcus shared a knowing look. This was exactly the kind of moment they'd been discussing. That fear, James said carefully, that's not weakness. That's awareness. The day you stop being afraid of making mistakes is the day you become dangerous to your team. Your grandfather's right, Marcus added. We all felt it before every mission. The weight of knowing that our decisions could mean life or death for our brothers. It never goes away, and it shouldn't. That fear keeps you sharp, makes you careful, helps you survive. But how do you handle it? Tommy asked. How do you function when the stakes are that high? James leaned back in his chair, gathering his thoughts. You trust your training? You trust your team. And you accept that you can't control everything. All you can do is make the best decisions possible with the information you have. Sometimes those decisions will be right. Sometimes they won't. But if you're making them for the right reasons, to protect your brothers and complete the mission, then you can live with the outcome. What if someone dies because of a call I make? The question hung in the air, raw and honest. It was the fear every leader carried, the nightmare that woke them in cold sweats. Then you honor their sacrifice by learning from it, Marcus said quietly. By becoming better, by using that knowledge to save others. That's what warriors do. We carry our fallen forward, not by forgetting them, but by making their loss mean something. Tommy nodded, processing their words. The commander told me about your team, about the 9 who didn't make it home. How do you live with that? James's expression grew distant. Some days better than others. For a long time, I didn't live with it well. I isolated myself, pushed people away, tried to bury it all. But that just made it worse. What helped was realizing that their sacrifice wasn't in vain. Every mission we completed after they fell, every life we saved, every objective we achieved, that was them continuing to serve through us. And now, Marcus interjected, we're seeing their legacy continue through warriors like you. That's how we honor them, by making sure the next generation is better prepared, better supported, better understood than we were. The 3 men sat in comfortable silence for a moment. 3 generations of warriors connected by shared understanding. There's something else, Tommy said. The commander wants me to be a team leader. He says I have the right instincts, the right temperament. But I'm only 23. Most of my teammates have more experience than me. Age doesn't matter, James replied. What matters is whether your team trusts you to make the hard calls, whether you're willing to put their safety above your own glory, and whether you can carry the burden of command. Only you can answer if you're ready for that. Tommy looked at his grandfather with new respect. You were a team leader, weren't you? That's why you feel the weight of those 9 deaths so heavily. You were responsible for them. James nodded slowly. I was, and yes, I carry that responsibility every day, but I do it again. Because being a leader means being willing to bear that burden so your team can focus on their jobs. It means making the hard calls so they don't have to. That's what leadership is in our world. Your grandfather was one of the best, Marcus added. His decisions saved my life more times than I can count. He brought 3 of us home when any other leader would have lost everyone. That's not luck. That's skill, judgment, and a willingness to carry weight that would crush most people. Tommy stood, walking to the porch railing to look out over the farm. I'm going to take the leadership position, and I'm probably going to make mistakes. But I promise you both, I'll do it with honor. I'll protect my brothers the way you protected yours. James joined his grandson at the railing, putting a hand on his shoulder. That's all any of us can do. Lead with honor, fight with courage, and remember that your brothers are worth any sacrifice. Do that, and whatever happens, you'll be able to live with yourself. Over the next few days, James and Marcus worked with Commander Hayes to establish their informal network. They called it the Shadow Watch, a name that captured both their classified history and their new mission of watching over the next generation. The concept was simple. Experienced special operations veterans, those who'd carried classified burdens, would make themselves available to active duty warriors struggling with the unique pressures of their profession. No official connection, no records, just quiet support when needed. Word spread carefully through trusted channels. Within weeks, they had 30 veterans signed up, spanning decades of special operations history. Navy SEALs, Army Special Forces, Delta operators, CIA paramilitary officers, all united by shared understanding of what it meant to operate in the shadows. Sarah, James's daughter, noticed the change in her father immediately. He seemed more engaged, more purposeful than he'd been in years. "Dad, what's going on?" she asked one morning over coffee. "You're different lately. More like yourself, if that makes sense." James smiled. "I spent 50 years trying to bury who I was, what I'd done. Thought that was the only way to live with it. Turns out the answer wasn't burying it. It was finding a way to make it useful, to help others avoid the mistakes I made. This has something to do with Tommy's graduation, doesn't it? Something happened that day." "Yeah," James admitted. "I realized that staying silent wasn't protecting anyone. It was just making the burden heavier. By sharing what I learned, by helping others carry their burdens, I'm finally making peace with my past." Sarah hugged her father tightly. "I'm proud of you, Dad. I don't know exactly what you did all those years ago, and maybe I don't need to. But I know you're a good man who served his country with honor. That's enough for me." 6 months after Tommy's graduation, Commander Hayes invited James back to Naval Base Coronado. Another Bud's class was graduating, and Hayes wanted him to speak to them as he had to Tommy's class. This time James brought Marcus with him. The 2 old warriors stood before a new generation, no longer hiding in the shadows, but stepping into the light, just enough to guide those who would follow. "We're not here to glorify war," James began, addressing the assembled graduates. "We're here to tell you the truth about what you're stepping into. The honor, yes, but also the cost. The brotherhood, absolutely, but also the burden. You're joining a profession that demands everything and gives recognition sparingly." Marcus continued, "But here's what we want you to know. You're not alone. The warriors who came before you, we understand what you're about to face. And we're here if you need us. Not officially, not formally, but warrior to warrior, brother to brother." They handed out simple cards with a phone number, nothing more. No names, no organization title, just a lifeline for those who might need it. After the ceremony, several young SEALs approached them privately. Some thanked them for their service. Others asked questions about handling the pressure, about dealing with loss, about carrying classified burdens. Each conversation was brief but meaningful, planting seeds that might help these young warriors avoid some of the pitfalls James and Marcus had faced. Tommy found them afterward, his face beaming. "Grandpa, Mr. Washington, I wanted you both to know. My first mission, it went well. Everyone came home. But there was a moment, a decision I had to make, and I heard your voices in my head. About protecting my brothers, about making the hard calls. It helped. James felt something he hadn't experienced in decades, a sense that his sacrifices, his struggles, his 50 years of carrying the burden, it had all led to this moment. His grandson, standing tall and whole, benefiting from wisdom earned through blood and loss. That's what it's all about, James said, his voice thick with emotion. Each generation learning from the last, becoming better because of our mistakes, stronger because of our sacrifices. You're carrying us forward, son, all of us. As the sun set over the Pacific, James and Marcus stood together, watching the new graduates celebrate with their families. Two old ghosts, finally stepping far enough into the light to guide others through the darkness. Think we did the right thing? Marcus asked. Breaking our silence, starting this network? James thought about the young warriors they'd spoken with, about Tommy's successful mission, about the cards with the lifeline number now in the pockets of dozens of new SEALs. Yeah, he replied with certainty. Some secrets need to be kept, but some truths need to be shared. We found the balance. What about the others? The 9 who didn't make it home. James looked up at the darkening sky, where stars were beginning to appear. 12 stars, like the tattoo on his arm. 9 of them shining brighter in memory. They'd approve. They died protecting their brothers, doing the impossible so others could live. This is just a continuation of that mission. We're protecting the next generation by sharing what we learned. That's exactly what they would have wanted. Marcus nodded, satisfied with that answer. So what's next for us old ghosts? We keep doing what we started, James replied. We watch over the watchers. We carry the burden so the next generation doesn't have to carry it alone. And maybe, just maybe, we make their path a little easier than ours was. They walked back to their car, 2 warriors who'd spent 50 years in the shadows, now serving in a different way. The secrets they'd kept would remain classified. The operations they'd conducted would never be fully revealed. But their wisdom, their understanding, their willingness to help others carry the burden, that was the real legacy they'd leave behind. As James drove away from the naval base, he glanced at the tattoo on his forearm. 12 stars, 9 of them shaded darker. His fallen brothers. For 50 years, he'd carried them as a burden. Now finally, he understood they'd always been a gift. The gift of understanding sacrifice, of knowing true brotherhood, of having something worth protecting and passing forward. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is the number from the card. Former Delta, 15 years out, struggling with some things. Can we talk? James smiled, pulling over to respond. This was his mission now. Not operations in the shadows, but helping others navigate the darkness. Not keeping secrets, but sharing wisdom. Not running from his past, but using it to build a better future for those who followed. He typed his response. Absolutely. Call anytime. Been where you are? You're not alone. The Montana sunset painted the sky as James continued his drive home. Behind him, a naval base where new warriors were celebrating their graduation. Ahead, a quiet farm where an old warrior had found his final mission. And all around in the shadows between, other warriors carrying burdens that would never be fully understood by those who hadn't walked that path. But they weren't alone anymore. James Mitchell and Marcus Washington had made sure of that. The Ghost team had one more mission, watching over those who would become the next generation of shadows. And this mission, unlike the others, would never end. It would continue as long as there were warriors willing to serve, secrets worth keeping, and old ghosts willing to light the way through the darkness. James pulled into his driveway as full darkness fell. Atlas greeted him enthusiastically, tail wagging with pure joy. Inside, he'd call that former Delta operator, talk for as long as needed, share the wisdom earned through 50 years of carrying classified burdens. Tomorrow, he'd work his farm. Next week, he'd speak to another graduating class. Next month, he'd help another warrior find their way through the darkness. The work was never done, but for the first time in half a century, James Mitchell was truly at peace with his past and his purpose. The tattoo on his arm, those 12 stars representing his fallen brothers, no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a blessing. 9 men who'd given everything had granted him 50 more years to make their sacrifice matter. And now, through Shadow Watch, through helping the next generation, through being present instead of hiding, he was finally honoring their memory the way they deserved. Some warriors carry rifles, others carry secrets. James Mitchell had done both. Now, in his final years, he was carrying something even more important: hope for those who would follow, understanding for those who struggled, and the promise that no warrior had to carry their burden alone. The stars came out over Montana, 12 of them seeming to shine just a bit brighter than the rest. 9 shadows watching over their brother as he completed his final mission. Not with violence or classified operations, but with wisdom, compassion, and the simple truth that warriors take care of their own. James Mitchell, the last ghost of Project Silent Thunder, had finally found his peace. Not by forgetting what he'd been, but by using it to help others become what they needed to be. And somewhere in the spaces between stars and shadows, 9 fallen brothers smiled. Their sacrifice had never been in vain. Their legacy lived on, not in classified files or secret operations, but in every warrior who now knew they weren't alone. That was the real mission. That had always been the real mission, and it was finally complete.